Welcome to the Nuclear Leader Podcast. I'm your host, Bill Nowicki, a former electrician's mate on the USS Minneapolis-St. Paul turned nuclear industry veteran with over 40 years of experience. From the U.S. to plants worldwide, I've not only led large engineering organizations, I've helped train nuclear leaders who keep nuclear power safe and strong. Each episode, we dive into the stories, challenges, and strategies of the dedicated people driving this vital industry. Let's spark some leadership excellence together. Keith Crissman is a stand-up guy. I've known him for many years, and we've worked together on various projects, and I watched his career grow, and he has a lot of insight into leadership at a plant that was struggling. So here's my friend, Keith Crissman.
Years this fall.
Really?
Yes, it happens fast.
Yeah. What was your final job?
I was a senior manager of projects at Riverbend Station.
That's crazy.
So I really enjoyed my time at Calvert Cliffs. I was there for 19 years, and then why did you end up leaving there? Well, I had the opportunity to go to Waterford as their quality assurance manager, and so that lent itself to some promotional opportunities and growth opportunities that I didn't think were coming at Constellation.
Yeah, absolutely. You have this real ability to not get flustered that at Calvert was a real benefit.
Yeah, well, we had our challenges, and quite frankly, I learned early on in my career that it was better to look at the situation and figure out how to correct it versus get upset about it, which is, I've seen some leaders demonstrate less than virtuous responses to issues and challenges.
Yeah, I'm really curious because this is all about leadership. And I learned so much from Calvert and when I was at McGuire about how to treat people. And I remember going to first level leadership essentials at IMPO. And one of the things they said is if you capture their heart, they'll follow you anywhere.
That's right.
And I didn't quite believe it until it started working for me. But what's your experience? You went from individual contributor at Calvert Cliffs, spending that many years there, to a manager. What was that transition like for you?
When I joined commercial nuclear power, I worked at Newport News Shipbuilding. That's where I actually got started. So I did an apprenticeship there, took on a supervisor role about 5 or 6 years after I finished my apprenticeship. And then there was a mass exodus at News Shipbuilding to Calvert when Calvert was in need of bodies to help get recovered. So I was probably one of the 115 or 16 or so of us that went to Calvert Cliffs from Newport News Shipbuilding. I went there originally as an individual contributor, as you said earlier, but became a planner after leaving the shop and was a planning supervisor for a while, became the human performance coordinator for a while. I became GMPO's left-hand man or whatever you want to call it, right? So basically the tech
GMPO?
General Manager Plant Ops is what Entergy calls them, but it was just general manager at Calvert. But I became the general manager's tech assist, and then I went back to the electric shop as the superintendent. And so I left Calvert as a superintendent and joined Entergy as the manager of quality assurance. And I did that for about 6 months. And the VP there says, if you're out of role, you need to be the maintenance manager. I said, okay. So I ended up going to be the maintenance manager at Waterford after about a year.
Did you know you were rolling downhill instead of uphill?
Yeah, no kidding. That was quite the abuse. But the good news is that I had experienced reactor vessel head replacement and steam generator replacement at Calvert. And while I was the maintenance manager at Waterford, we did a steam generator replacement and a head replacement. So it was pretty cool. But it wasn't new to me, so I got to enjoy it.
Yeah, I remember so many stories from that electric shop. They were not an easy place to start my career. I remember watching them play cards. And I happened to make a comment about the score was wrong. And I remember, I think it was Harry Hunsinger turned around and said, "What the F are you doing here?"
Yeah.
kind of thing. And they were not an easy crowd.
Yeah, but once you got inside their shell, they were a good bunch. It was with the best electric shop I'd ever worked around. I mean, those guys were talented, well versed in their what they needed to do. The Dennis Rapalsis, the Steve Haydens,
Yep.
those guys were awesome, and they were a great group to learn under.
Yeah, that's true. They were, but like I said, what was Mr. Graham's first name? You're probably better. The
Mark.
Supervisor, Mark Graham. Yeah. I remember going up to him and he said something very gruff and like,
Mark. Yeah, Mark was either a really easy person to talk to or very hard. There was no middle ground.
Yeah, when I followed up with him, because we became friends, and he said, yeah, if an engineer comes down, which I get all kinds of questions, I want them to do their own work first and then ask me a question. And if I can get rid of them just by, being gruff, then less work for me. It must not have been that important, which kind of makes some logical sense.
Yeah.
But it wasn't about relationship building. But I think between you and me, we understood the importance of relationships. How did you apply that in your roles as you moved up in the organizations that you led?
First thing that I had to do was, because I moved around a lot of departments, I ended up moving from one site to another site within Entergy, which creates the opportunity to go learn a whole new group of people, their mannerisms. And believe it or not, even within the same fleet, the sites are so diverse and the way they respond ultimately and what kind of skill set they have, their capabilities, their strengths and weaknesses. And the only way to get to know all that is just sit down with those individuals and talk to them, learn what makes them tick. I actually had some experiences at Riverbend Station where the craft had become, I'll call it, engineers are going to tell me what to do. I'm not going to do anything else. So I had to break that mold while I was the maintenance manager at station that, no, we're the maintenance folks. And the only time we don't direct our maintenance is when we have a problem we can't resolve. But we're not waiting on engineering to tell us what to do and how to do that. Maintenance's role is to fix things. And so, I think I got through the mechanical maintenance shop first, actually, because there was a lot of reluctance for the technicians to do anything there. And I think a lot of it was a culture before. It was a heavily engineer-led organization. And so influence carried on from generation to generation. And it was really a growth opportunity for the maintenance organization when I took over to express their capabilities and demonstrate their abilities to do things without being guided by an engineer.
Well, it kind of reminds me of when I led the engineering part of the projects group. I always challenged the installers, the techs to challenge us in engineering to give them a good product. But that way, the whole organization moves up because you're challenging one another.
And well, the interesting thing you say that is all the sites have construction standards. Right? They were all built to certain standards. They were adopted into their protocol and documentation. And I think the biggest challenge there is that Entergy took a position that they didn't teach construction standards to the craft. They hired craft in, and the only people who really construction standards were the engineers. So you went to the engineers for the answers versus the lot. So we had to change our training program maintenance to also teach the construction standards that were applicable to their trade. For instance, electrical maintenance, remember from Calvert, was heavy in E406. It's in my brain, right? So I know that, and I had to exercise those frequently as an individual contributor, as a supervisor, as a planner. And we had to do a quick uptake at the Riverbend Station to teach our folks how to use those construction standards instead of relying on an engineering document.
Yeah. And I look at, what you say and just 45 seconds to me is a huge effort. And I want to take you back to what you said earlier, which is you knew you had to get to know people in each one of these roles. Did you do that deliberately? Was that down or was it walking around?
A lot in the beginning was sitting down with people individually. And then once I got to know a little bit about each of those individuals, as a manager, it was my direct reports, my superintendents and supervisors. More of a group setting with the individual contributors as opposed to individual set downs with those folks. But being available, announcing availability, sharing like 2 or 3 real key insights about me for the individual contributors, and making sure they understood that, I'm here to learn about them, and really didn't have plans to do anything else but lead that group and help them get better. And quite frankly, I did. I told you the QA manager and maintenance manager at Waterford. So huge group there. And unlike Constellation, the maintenance manager owned the refueling group, owned dry fuel storage, owned the contracted workforce. So there was a huge group to learn and get them to know me as well. So, like you said, you earn their hearts, and they'll follow. And it was a great group of folks at both Riverbend Station and Waterford that manifested into those opportunities. Yeah, it was quite interesting to deal with those personalities, and there are quite a few personalities in any organization, as you can remember, like the Joe Darnalls, the Harry Humsankers. There's just a lot of talent, but a lot of personality.
Yeah, Rick Weekly. Yeah, there were plenty of them. But I want to go back one more time. So you deliberately spend time with your direct reports and then try to understand the individual contributors, both through those discussions and, large groups. What I could see, people are like, oh yeah, we've heard this before. He's sticking around. He's going to be here forever. But, let's be honest, maintenance manager, superintendent, or whatever the term is a burnout job. How did you convince them or get them to trust you versus what, we experienced at Calvert Cliffs, which is a lot of management turnover. I think when we were in maintenance, how many, like 2 or 3 different superintendents?
I think
Harry, Block, whatever his name was, Snyder. I mean, there was quite a few.
Yeah. And I think it took about a year in position before people actually started to believe I was there for the long haul, because Riverbend Station, maintenance managers, they didn't stick around very long. I think the longest tenure before I had it was probably about a year in recent history, and I had it for 5. So
wow.
After the first year, it was pretty easy to convey to those guys that they see me in the plant. Unlike the predecessors that always had meetings to go to, I delegated a lot of my meetings to my superintendents as much as I could, so that I could spend time in the field and actually do job observations. Sponsored some really interesting projects that were O&M kind of projects. So I got to spend time with people actually implementing. For our fuel failures at Riverbend Station, we had the foreign material from a probe that failed in 1985. The probe eventually made it all the way to the reactor vessel. So we had to do a feed ring nozzle repair, which was an O&M expense because it wasn't a capital improvement. And so I became the sponsor for that. Really enjoyed it. It was a one-of-a-kind, only place in the world we've ever done anything like this, but manufactured a clamp at the Westinghouse, demonstrated the installation of the clamp. And my VP at the time, Bill, his last name escapes me right now, but it'll come to me. But Bill said, you only got a couple of parameters that you got to have as a sponsor. He said, this project has 24 hours of critical path time and the refuel outage we're going to implement it in. There'll be no cutting or welding in the vessel. And other than that, here's your budget, and go execute, right? So we had to do it all with long tools from the bridge. We had 24 hours to get it done in an outage. And the Westinghouse team that designed the clamp were really, really excited about the opportunity. And the Westinghouse was very supportive of the effort. They have I don't know if you've ever been to the Westinghouse complex in Tennessee, but they've got a mock-up of a reactor vessel, of the boiling water reactor vessel. And so we actually demonstrated with the long handle tools and a special clamp. They did a complete mock-up with an extra clamp. And we demonstrated that with their refueling teams on how to put that on. It was really cool, a lot of fun.
That does sound cool. Almost sounds like a space station type.
It really was, because you're working with long handle tools in 25 foot of water with a clamp that's got to stay on for the rest of the life of the facility, right? So it was pretty neat.
Yeah, and I bet you early on, did you give your boss some expectations? Because, when I look back, I was lucky enough to build a team from scratch, and that was it wasn't easy, but I didn't have to deal with, I didn't walk in with issues necessarily. I created them.
Right.
So in your instance, it sounds like you walked into a culture that had issues. You walked into folks that have probably given up on, yeah, here's the next guy. What did you say to your bosses and set expectations? Because that doesn't turn around in a day.
No, it doesn't. And, it was a commitment to give me an opportunity to leverage my skill set with the team and get some buy-in, but to also be visible, right? So I think the invisible management team, particularly at the individual contributor level, was quite obvious at Riverbend Station when I joined it. Waterford, not so much, but Riverbend, it seemed to be a real isolation between the leaders of the facility and the individual contributors. You get the all hands meetings once every 6 months or whatever, and that might be the only time those people actually saw the general manager or the VP. And that was unacceptable in my opinion, because the only way to show a unified management team engagement is to actually be engaged and come down and spend some time with them and not run the facility from afar.
Yeah. Well, it kind of reminds me of Calvert Cliffs. We learned not to do certain things. And I think they had a very similar response to things, which is this superintendent of the electric shop, what was Kenny Riggleman, was always in the field and interacting, but above his level, it was very hard to even find people.
And it's funny you say that, because my first year at Calvert Cliffs, I was doing a reactor coolant pump reconnect, and where they're at, right? So they're not exactly in the most hospitable places, especially during an outage.
And that was the old wrapping.
That was old tape method, right? That
tape method.
The step up to the quick locks, right? So the quick locks were a dream.
Yeah, that was awesome.
But actually, elastomolds is what they're called. But it was Ken Robinson. Mark was the electrical supervisor, electrical engineer.
Oh.
Mark.
Yeah.
It'll come to me.
Kirk Condos. What was it?
Kirk Condos.
Kirk Condos. Yeah.
But the cool thing about that is that we weren't afraid to change, right? As Calvert Cliff Group, we supported change, and you got it from across the organization. If this looked like a good idea and was something we could do, let's go do it. If it's going to save milliram and it's going to save, opportunities to swap out equipment, people jumped on it, and we drove things like that home. And I found so much resistance at Riverbend with change. Don't want to change. Don't want to deviate from the standard. Well, things have changed in 40 years. We ought to change. Right. So stuff like these pressurized clamp connections versus the old mechanical connections. It was really hard to get people to go to what the state of the art is, but not so much at Calvert. We were a good organization. The old simple change to the vendor tech manual let you do a lot of things. There'd be a sketch in the vendor tech manual that we created that said, it's okay to do this. Yeah. So a little more difficult with the, I'll say our organization at Entergy took the standard design process. Is basically said, we're going to make everything go through the most extremist way to change the plant versus the easiest way to change the plant. Yeah. It was, that was a little bit of a hurdle.
Yeah, but you said you set expectation with your boss, kind of said, hey, this is going to take a little while. Did you give him or her updates on how things were going? How did that work? So you didn't go back to the old culture, how that could happen.
Well, I think right at the very beginning, I had some opportunities presented by some of the craft and a couple of my supervisors to get to spend some time in front of the plant manager. And so I think he learned pretty early on, what my expectations were and how I was going to handle things. And as the reins got released a little bit on me, I was able to help drive more change in the organization without having to look over my shoulder and ask for permission. It's kind of interesting. So some of that's through demonstration. And I think that was probably a lot of my predecessors' challenges. Rather than try to express how they were going to change the organization and get that opportunity to lead, they spent all their time in recovery, not actually making a change in the organization, but just trying to survive.
Yeah, well, it's such a reactive thing. And I remember doing projects that folks, when you talk to operations and you tell them, okay, in 2 years, you couldn't get them to show up to meetings.
Right.
So you had to put something, a deadline, create deadlines for them, but find ways to get them to interact, or else you couldn't get them to stay awake in project meetings. It just didn't resonate with them. And I'm sure you experienced something like that. Inaccurate bookkeeping gets into QA audit problems. So Next Axiom corrects that by automating most of it. All you have to do is verify what you see, which is the right drawings, the right procedures, and it'll flag all that stuff beforehand so you don't run into problems afterwards and get pinged on a QA audit. Those days should be long gone, but they're not unless you contact my friends at nextaxiom.com.
I learned a lot about the change with regards to equipment modifications. The last 3 years I was at Riverbend Station as the project manager of projects, getting the engagement and making sure that the operation understood that they were buying off on what we were getting ready to do for them, not to them. And it's interesting to get the right player in those meetings, because the folks, it's nice to have an SRO on the team, but if reality is that the SRO is not going to have anything to do with the mod, it's going to be a poor plant operator who's going to have to deal with this when it's all said and done, then I'll say all shift plant operator might be a better fit for today's meetings, because they're going to be the ones that ask the right questions. SRO is going to be 20 years removed from actually touching plant equipment. So he's not necessarily going to be the guy that's going to answer and ask the right questions.
Yeah, no, I agree. And, one of the skill sets that you had and have is your ability to talk to the folks in the shop and interact with them in a way they're comfortable with. And I would think there's many leaders that are listening to this podcast that maybe don't have that background. What would you suggest they do to kind of bridge that gap so they don't come across as, well, I don't know, I'm the one with the master's degree or whatever?
I think the easiest way to get your message across to the group is through the reoccurring opportunities to have those one-off conversations with individuals within the group. Don't miss the opportunity to recognize somebody. We had a site VP at Calvert that used to just really make me upset when he wouldn't even look at you, right? He'd walk past you in the hallway, wouldn't, acknowledge your existence. And I said, that's not the way to treat people. Is, you need to be responsive. You need to be recognizing. You need to take advantage of every one of those opportunities you have with those individuals to show that you understand them and you understand their plight. In order for them to be successful, they have to be able to support the organization. And the only way to do that really is to get behind whatever it is you're trying to drive. And you get that through that connection.
Yeah. Now, the other thing I'm really curious about is you were in that role in a station that, was struggling a little bit. And you talked about previous leaders, but whenever something happens, they got on the wrong component or we messed up without, it was still energized. It's very easy to get out of that mode of changing culture. You're going to get pulled or attempted to be pulled. How did you stay away from the shiny object and keep your eye downfield a little bit?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge then is to recognize that people are watching what you're doing. The whole organization at that point, if you have somebody like an INC tech who put a jumper in the wrong place or failed to follow the step in the procedure correctly, or a mechanic who went to the wrong component and didn't want them or tag out boundaries or something like that, the whole maintenance organization is looking at how you respond to that. So the way I typically responded to those is that the next 24 hours, I was in all of my shops at least once to talk about the condition, to tell them what we're doing about it, to learn from it, right, so that we don't repeat it, but more importantly, demonstrate the safety of the plant and the safety of the individuals versus the corrective actions that we're going to be taking with the individuals. That was I think the biggest opportunity at Riverbend Station. There have been so many, I'll say, wrist slapping opportunities that people were like the dog, when the bell goes off,
right,
they would run to the corner and go, well, I'm glad it's not me. Right.
Yeah.
Rather than learn from the opportunity to keep it from happening to everybody, it was more of a boy, I'm sure glad I missed that one.
Yeah. Well, that's such an important message that I think everybody needs to hear because it's such a complicated, like you said about that piece of Flotsam and Jetsam that got in the reactor vessel after being dropped or damaged in 1985. I mean, you just show up for work and all of a sudden your life's turned upside down. It's very difficult environment to do what you describe. And yet it sounded like for you it was pretty fulfilling.
Absolutely. We actually used the 1985 feed water probe failure, which was a known phenomenon to happen in the 80s. I want to say it was Clinton that had actually written an OE out there that the feed water probe had broken and everybody in the industry should go look that had these feed water probes in. And River Bend did their due diligence in 1986. They went and looked at the probe and found that it was broken. But they did a causal product that said there's such an arduous path between there and the vessel that it could never make it to the vessel. And I want to say there was another plant that experienced the failure in 1990 something. And we did a OE evaluation on it. We did another causal product and basically said Riverbend Station's not susceptible because of the arduous path, blah, 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 blah. Fast forward to 2010 and the probe end makes it all the way to a feed nozzle inside the vessel, right? And starts to create foreign material in the vessel. So we had a couple of opportunities to think about how to stop that. And we used it as a learning opportunity that basically started a slogan at the site that most of us carried in our pocket, which was, what if I'm wrong? Right. And you're making these conclusions, but what if I'm wrong? What if the con is true, right? It can make it to the vessel. Now, what do I do? Or, if this is potentially going to fail, then how do I mitigate that potential failure? So we use it as a risk tool going forward. We actually learn from it.
That's amazing. So back to something like that happens, and we all know what it's like, and hopefully educate folks in the industry. So something bad happens, you get a fuel failure, and immediately the questions start. And it's not just your management, you get, corporate, and you have regulator, perhaps the Institute of Nuclear Power Operations. You're getting pulled in 20 different directions. How did you manage that and stay in role and not get too depressed or taken away from the goal?
Yeah, I think the disappointing piece is that it takes so long to recover from a fuel failure, right? So short of replacing the entire core at a boiling water reactor, that's 6 years, right? It takes you 6 years to get all of the fuel out, potentially all the foreign material out without making a commitment to do a core offload. And nobody's going to give away 4 years worth of fuel just to potentially mitigate future fuel failure. But I think as an organization, the key message there is that you really have to double down on your efforts on foreign material. And we use that what if I'm wrong mentality in a lot of places, right? So we spent quite a bit of money, but it was a legitimate effort. We went on the secondary side of the plant of the PWR. Really is no secondary side of the plant in a boiling water reactor, but we went into discharge of feed pumps. We looked at valves. We looked at drains. We collected specimens through filtering of the feed water system over like 6 years. We put feed water strainers in. So we were the first nuclear plant in the United States to install feed water strainers right before the vessel. So some good came from it. So if we had another catastrophic failure of a component somewhere in what would be called the secondary side of the plant, it won't make it to the vessel. Right. Yeah. So I think we got some good stuff out of it. A lot of preventative measures were taken, but we also were able to do a lot of analysis on, where's this material coming from that we were collecting? Because obviously we started finding things. You go look for things, you're going to find things. And, we had an old plant manager at Calvert Cliff who says, careful what you look for because you're probably going to find it, and you're going to find some stuff that you're not looking for.
Right.
And so, he actually made a comment that we, I don't know if you remember this or not, but we were the first plant we're going to use new steam generator eddy current probes, Westinghouse analysis for us. And he says, careful with this new probe technology. It's going to show you things that you've not been able to see before.
Right. I kind of remember that.
And how are we going to respond to those as an organization? Right. Because you're going to see, these probes are so much better than the probes we had before. you got to be ready for the potential to see stuff that you haven't seen. Right. And lo and behold, the first hours of analysis of the steam generator tubes showed something different than what we had seen before. And everybody would, then it was circle the wagons. Oh my gosh, our new generators are not good. Take deep breaths, go back and look at it and make sure that you understood. And the good news was that the leadership team was pretty sharp at Calvert. If you remember, they had the old equipment on standby.
Yeah.
So the first course was, hey, go put the old equipment in and see if it's any different looking to the old equipment. And it did. And it looked identical to what it did before. So there was really nothing new there. You just could see more detail with the new stuff. So you got to be prepared for those things, or you can find yourself in an analytical lock.
Yeah. No, that's a great comment. And yeah, you're absolutely right. So what I would say and what you're describing is your career was transformative, not only for the station and the organization, but for you. What are you most proud of when you look back on your whatever number of years as a person in commercial nuclear power?
Well, 30 plus years, we'll go with that. I think the most proud thing was every place I left, the people that worked with me, worked for me, worked around me, wanted me to be with them and wanted me to stay with them, wanted me to still be their leader. As a matter of fact, my wife still gets questioned today at Riverbend Station as to whether I'm coming back to be the maintenance manager again, because they all miss me. And so that's the legacy that I'm really comfortable with and proud of.
Yeah.
It's not what I expected, but it's a nice recognition of the effort that I put in. Quite frankly, it was not easy, and it certainly wasn't effortless. But it's nice to be recognized for the effort I put in.
No, it sounds like, especially you were at the right person at the right time for Riverbend. They were definitely have some challenges. So looking ahead, I'm sure you're staying aware of what's going on in our industry. We're trying to restart Palisades, maybe Wayne Arnold, some other plans that have been scuttled.
Yeah.
What are you excited about when you think about nuclear power, nuclear energy in the U.S.?
It's interesting. I spent some time thinking about that the other day, and I think
as you work on your farm or whatever you got going.
Yeah, I think SMRs definitely have a place. Small modular reactors have a place in our society. Unfortunately, I think the infrastructure, the ability to construct the large scale new nuclear plants like we did in Georgia are hard. For whatever reason, we can't keep pace, and we can't be on budget, and we can't be on time for the big machines. So I'm hoping the small machines are the answer, even if you got to put 5 or 6 of the small machines in a location that's previously retired. I'm concerned about restarting previously scuttled facilities. If in fact they restart like a Palisades or restart, I think 3 Mile was in pretty good shape.
Yeah.
It was shut down.
I think it's the one that melted down.
Yeah, that one will never work again. But Grace actually got to spend some time there right after the accident.
Oh, really?
Yeah, she got to see some things that she'd only read about. So she really enjoyed her time at TMI too, because they had a lot of places where they had to still go sample at the time she was there, and applies the stuff that was in these individual rooms from the after episode. But I'm excited about what is this, about the third renaissance of our industry.
Yeah, right.
All right. We had the potential back when Unistar was formed. I was really excited about potentially getting the Calvert 3, a 9 Mile 3.
Right. They tore down the Boy Scout camp, I heard.
Yeah, filled in the Eagles Den and the pool, and all that stuff went away because Calvert 3 was going to go there. And it's unfortunate, that impetus didn't occur, but, carbon capture, carbon elimination is, I think, the opportunity for this latest renaissance. And as long as we remain committed to some sort of climate mitigation strategy, nuclear has a role in that. And I think even California's figured out that it's probably better to keep the nuclear plant running than it is to scuttle it at this point in time.
Yeah, I looked at the numbers on Germany that shut down their plants, and they're getting nuclear energy from, yeah, it's crazy to look at the numbers, but yeah,
Well, even we shut the Vermont Yankee down after getting licensed
right.
and after finally getting the place in a situation where it could run for another 20 years. But Vermont Yankee was shut down. Vermont's getting their power from Ontario Power, which is still a nuclear power generation facility.
Yeah.
It's okay, but I don't want it in my backyard. And I think nuclear did itself a huge disservice back in the 60s and the 70s when the facilities were originally being constructed. It was almost sacred. I grew up in Newport News, Virginia, and Surrey was being constructed as I was growing up, but I didn't even know there was a nuclear power plant being built anywhere in the neighborhood because everybody kept it under cloak. I think putting it out front, demonstrating the capabilities, sharing with society what it brings would have done us a great service in the 70s. And even after 3 Mile Island, while it was a significant event, it shouldn't have shuttered the industry like it did. Ultimately, what we did to ourselves is we created a huge cash challenge to the organizations that were already building facilities. They think about all the facilities that were under construction at the time that were scuttled because they couldn't afford the changes.
And then Fukushima happened. A buddy of mine I visited down in South Texas project. It was so funny. Somebody had put a picture on the wall. So they had started it and they had a picture of, I don't know, 35 people standing outside, and they had a South Texas project 3 and 4, whatever, banner. And then someone had photoshopped a pie in the sky because they shut it down, Yeah, but it's pretty funny.
Yeah, I would have liked to have seen Unistar be successful. That would have been awesome to have a couple of 3, because as I heard from the inside is that Pennsylvania Power and Light was also looking to Unistar to build something new for them. So we would have had 4 or 5 places constructed in the United States in a relatively short term, I think.
Yeah.
Hard to say because we were going with that EDF 1,600 megawatt behemoth, and sounds like they've had their own struggles in France getting theirs finished.
Yeah, it's interesting if you look at China, though, really. They have 16 or something units under construction. So,
well, there's a series there of checks and balances too, right? So regulation, almost no regulation. I don't know what kind of oversight they've got, but I can guarantee you they're not spending the kind of money that we spend on like the Georgia facilities to get a nuclear power plant running.
It's much, much different culture there. Yeah, it's a fascinating time. I also think what will help is young people. They look at the numbers and emotionally, they're not emotionally tied like the generation we are in to alternatives. If you think about the wind's not blowing, the sun's not shining, you're going to be in trouble unless you have those base load units and all that good stuff. So I don't really see an alternative that's green besides nuclear. So I think young people have really come around to that fact.
Yeah, it's interesting. I never thought in my lifetime I'd have Greenpeace touting that nuclear is a good option.
Yeah.
And there they are, waving the flag as strong as anybody, saying, hey, this is a whole lot better than burning coal or natural gas, and this is the right way to go for the interim. I'm excited about fusion. Unfortunately, fusion has been 10 years off since I was in high school.
Yeah.
But the latest and greatest information that I've read on it leads me to believe that fusion's probably closer than it's ever been. And I think that Tomahawk reactor in France is going to prove invaluable. I think we're going to have some commercial fusion in the next 4 or 5 years, I think.
Yeah. And maybe when you go back to River Bend as the maintenance manager, you can check it out.
We'll be building a fusion reactor at River Bend too. I do like a lot of energy companies are talking about using some of the green space around their plants to do things like solar. And so some of that will come to fruition, and it'll make sense.
Yeah. And the need is there. And I don't think we can get away with not building anymore. It's the load growth and AI and data centers. I mean, we just can't get away with what we've been doing.
I hope it manifests itself into some of the capabilities coming back to the country, right? So you think about when we replaced our step-up transformers at Calvert, there were really only two bidders, and we went to both places and they were international locations versus Westinghouse in Pittsburgh or General Electric in Schenectady, or those guys don't build the big components anymore. So it's I'd like to see the United States come back with a few of the industries that would supply some of those large commodity items like feed pumps and transformers and generators and steam generators and reactor vessels and heads. So we went to Japan for reactor vessel heads, and you had to get in line there for those. And we went.
Our stator was manufactured in Poland, so we had a seed stator at McGuire that we swapped out with, and it was made in Poland because they no-bid it. So Siemens internally bid it to their manufacturers. Didn't have enough welders and forgings for such a large unit in the States.
But we're replacing the rotor of this outage at River Business. I'm still part of it, but replacing the rotor, and that rotor was manufactured by Toshiba, sent to Schenectady, New York, and wound there by the General Electric folks. So at least we can still wind them.
Yeah.
But we can't make the core component.
Yeah. Same thing with Siemens. They stacked, because this one was so big, they had to sit it and stack each individual layer of the stator by hand.
Wow.
They did that in Charlotte, but it took a lot longer than they thought it would. So that was a problem. But anyway, I really appreciate your time, Keith. It was great catching up with you. And you met your wife, Bernice, at the Calvert Cliffs.
I did.
While I was there. I remember that happening. So yeah, it was exciting times back then. There was a lot going on.
Really was. I still remember going to training with you and getting our votes advanced. Yes.
Didn't I get drunk and
yeah.
I got
good things happen.
Didn't I talk about a hot tub party? There was some crazy stuff.
And get passed through the back windows of a rental car, good stuff like that.
Yeah, that's right.
And the Chris Beans and the Corky Simses of the world will get you in trouble.
Yeah. Well, I never learned my lesson, but I loved everybody there. It was so much fun. I remember sitting in the back laughing because somebody would say a snide comment. I'm like, I'm not supposed to laugh. I'm supposed to be professional, but funny's funny. You know what I mean?
Yeah, we had a great team. It was it was a lot of fun, and I really enjoyed that opportunity to be engaged with a team that was ready to learn, ready to grow. I look around our industry, as I matured, and I saw a lot of my peers and a lot of my superiors, other places in the industry, because of what we did at Calvert Cliffs. I look at that group as, not only did we recover from the challenges of the 80s, but we became a really strong team. And I want to say it was as much relationship-based as anything. But we knew how to treat people, and we knew how to get things done because we were treating people the right way.
Yeah. Could have been those Christmas parties too.
Well, it might have been.
All right. Arthur, thank you so much for your time. This was a lot of fun catching up.
All right, Bill. Don't wait too long to get back with me again.
I won't. Right. I'll check in with you.
All right. Take care, buddy.
Yeah. Hope you enjoyed that episode of the Nuclear Leader Podcast. Keith Crissman is a top-notch leader. He's retired now, but his legacy lives on, and I hope you enjoyed that episode. That's it for this episode of The Nuclear Leader. Thanks for joining me as we shine a light on the people powering nuclear safety and success. If you're inspired to lead better, subscribe, share, and drop us a review. Until next time, stay sharp and keep leading the way.